The circle of forest is just that. A circle. About 750 m in diameter. It's not particularly big. It is ringed by 2 meters of grassless rock, and then beyond that is the wilderness. Moss and fern and cliff and weeds. The trees and plants that grow inside the circle are thick and strange. It's raining this evening. I sit in my little hut with a mug of warm tea as the rain batters and clatters against the roof. It leaks through in one corner and drips quickly down into a bucket I've placed there. My rifle rests against my leg. My hut has a direct view to the centerpiece of the forest. A dark cave-like hole in the middle of a clearing, descending down and into the unknown. I tried to go through it once, but my head began to pound the deeper I went down, to the point of agony actually, and I was forced to retreat. I don't go down there anymore. Not much point to it. My colleague joins me tonight. He sips from a mug of his own. "Ah," he says with a pleasant smile. "Delicious. Nothing like a warm mug on a cold day." "Mm-hmm," I reply, scratching my beard. "What do you think might be coming up tonight?" he asks. "Who could tell? Nothing, hopefully." "It's been a while since the last one," he murmurs. "We're overdue a visitor." Yes, I suppose we are," I sigh. Visitor is darkly comical way to refer to the things that clamber out of the hole, coined because of how crushingly lonely it can get at this particular station. I've been here for 3 months now. Another 3 to go. But of course I have Robbie here with me tonight. Someone to talk to. I've missed him. The rain splashes through the leaves and into the undergrowth, and I take a final sip before setting the mug down onto the wooden little table with a low thunk. I rise to my feet. "Right. Let's head a little closer, shall we?" "Ugh," he mutters, glancing out the doorway. "Into the rain? You know it, brother." He sighs. "Fine. Are we splitting up or sticking together this time?" It's a no-brainer. "We'll stick together," I tell him. I clap him on the shoulder and gesture for the man to head outside. "You know how I get lonely." He chuckles. "Right you are, man." And out he goes, rifle in hand. I hoist up my own and out I go, the water splashing against my hood and my shoulders as we push through the undergrowth and a little closer towards the hole. The reason for this little pursuit outdoors is the rain itself. It is unfortunately obscuring our view, and whilst on a clear day I might be content to just sit in the hut and wait for one of the sensors to trigger, I also don't fully trust the sensor's effectiveness in such weather. So out we go. The ferns brush up against my camo-clad legs as we approach the clearing, and we take our positions beside the best lookout trees. Robbie is a little off though. "Hey," I say to him above the rush of the rain. He looks at me. "Wake up, man, you can be seen from there. Back up a little." He chuckles and rubs his head. "Of course. Right you are." We settle down and we wait, and we watch, as water pools and puddles around the hole in the ground ahead. It's surrounded by tumbled rock and stone, though I couldn't say where from. There isn't another rock of such size in the whole circle of forest. Perhaps someone moved them there long, long ago. It's another 20 minutes before anything stirs from the hole. Robbie and I just spend the time shooting the shit. "I just think you'd be so much happier if you quit this business, man," Robbie says to me. "Being isolated for such long periods of time, it's not healthy. How long you got left?" 3 months, I tell him. "So 6 months total. Half a year in such a place as this?" Robbie shakes his head. "You need to be around people. Humans are social creatures." "Perhaps," I grunt. Robbie opens his mouth to say more, but I cut him off with a quick gesture, pointing to the hole. We both creep a little lower in our positions and watch as a shadow begins to shamble its way from the depths of the hole. The thing is covered in slime and chatters as it appears, armored, brown, and disgusting. 2 tiny beady eyes peer out as its antennae twitch and circle around. Its rows upon rows of sharp legs clatter over the rock and slice down into the wet grass and the mud. I feel a swell of revulsion rise up in my stomach, but it's okay. These types are always the easiest. I raise my rifle, Robbie does likewise, and the abomination is riddled with quick holes, its shell and flesh bursting out into the undergrowth as it screeches in fury. I suppress a gag. "Disgusting," Robbie mutters. "Where the hell do these things even come from?" I don't bother responding. It's a question we've asked each other countless times over the years. I have my theories. From amidst the ruin of the centipede-like creature, and out from the hole, comes a deer. It raises its head and sniffs the air. I raise the rifle. And the deer bolts, bouncing and speeding away over the undergrowth. "Fuck!" I shout, hesitating as I look between the deer and my colleague. I point at him. "Watch the damned hole. I'll be back." Yeah, chance would be a fine thing, but the deer is the priority for now. I take off between the trees after it. I raise the gun and fire, exploding a branch as I do so. The deer still hops speedily away. They aren't usually this fast, these things. I stumble after it, leaping over ferns and bushes, and the deer makes the mistake of turning sideways to try and ack away from me. I take the opportunity to raise the rifle to my shoulder, firing again, with a better chance of hitting, and this time I strike. Black fluid bursts from the deer's side and a strangled, decidedly non-deer-like noises escapes its throat as it crashes down to the ground with a rustle of ferns. I wipe the rain and sweat from my forehead and turn instantly back, chest rising and falling as I hastily return to the clearing. I approach from the opposite side this time, and I raise a hand to Robbie, but just as I expected, the man isn't looking. His interest is elsewhere, staring off into the woods. He rises to his feet. "Robbie!" I shout at him, and he swivels to look at me. "Were you watching the hole?" The man does not respond, and movement at the clearing's edge catches both our attentions. An anxious-looking man with a backpack and waterproof trousers shuffles out from between the trees, a crumpled map in one hand. Hello," he says, looking between Robbie and I. I raise my rifle at once, and Robbie does likewise. I begin making my way around the clearing's edge towards my colleague, barrel of the weapon fixed carefully on the stranger. Hey," he says in alarm, putting up his hands. "I don't understand. You guys are rangers, right? I'm not a poacher or anything like that." He forces out an awkward laugh. "I'm just lost, honestly. Literally. I'm literally lost." "Where are you from?" I ask him. I'm sorry," the man replies, adjusting his glasses. "I didn't realize I had an accent." A poor attempt at a joke. Another weak laugh. "Tell me where you're from right now or I'll blow your head off," I tell the stranger plainly as I reach my position beside Robbie. "Speak clearly." I'm from Obdebrand," the man mutters. "What?" I reply, jerking the rifle. "I said speak clearly." Obdebrand," the man replies, raising his voice, the terror in his face quite evident. "That isn't a real place," I tell him. "What country?" I don't... What damned country?" "This country, obviously. Please, this isn't funny. Just let me go, all right? I'll find my own way. Please." I exchange a look with Robbie. "Tell me the name of any country, hiker. That's all I want to know." The man shakes where he stands as the rain pours down through the trees. He stutters and mutters, and eventually he manages to speak, though his words are a string of nonsense. I take quick aim and pull the trigger, and a hole appears in the center of the man's forehead. He drops like a brick as black fluid bursts and spurts from his face, his skin twitching and crawling as a massive insect-like leg bursts from his ribcage. I spit onto the ground. "Jesus," Robbie murmurs. I consider chiding the man for allowing the creature through, but there's no point really. So I let it go. The corpse twitches in the grass beneath the rain. "Obdebrand," Robbie repeats. "Do you think it's a real place, or did he just make it up? A random combination of sounds?" "Who can say, man?" I reply, shrugging. "Your guess is as good as mine." Robbie says nothing further. We sit side by side and watch the hole for another 30 minutes. We are quieter this time, but still, it's nice just to have his company. The rain falls. "I gotta take a piss, man," Robbie says, breaking the silence. He clambers to his feet. "Hey, well, don't go too far. Just piss right there." "Huh?" "I need you alert and active, my man. Just piss right there." Robbie hesitates and gives me a look before shaking his head. All right, man. I'll try not to turn around too fast. Wouldn't want to hit you with my dick and knock you out. I chuckle as he relieves himself against the tree, a chuckle which is quickly lost as a horde of shadowy beings begins scampering out of the hole. Action, Robbie! I tell him, quick, stay alert. The shadowy beings quickly take shape through the rain. They are all exact copies of myself. They don't make a break for the exit. They run to me. Soldier! One of the copies shouts into my face, grabbing me by the shoulders. Jesus, thank God! You're alive! Right, come with us immediately. There's still time to get you to safety. I shove him away and raise the rifle. My copy stares at the barrel, then at me, and then swears and throws out his hands. Again? For fuck's sake. Why does he keep doing this? He turns to another of my copies and gives him a light shove in the chest. Why won't he just come back? What are we doing wrong? I choose not to partake in this little piece of theater. I take aim and fire, bursting a hole in my copy's neck. Initially the blood is red, which is rather worrying, but it quickly runs black as he falls gasping to the floor. The other copies of myself all retreat in panic. There are 5 more of them. Robbie, one of them shouts, gesturing to my colleague. Tell him to come back already. We can't keep doing this. Robbie stutters and mutters, and I fire. The copy's head bursts open. Down he goes. 2 of the surviving copies attempt a hasty escape. Back to the hole, which I find interesting, but not interesting enough to spare them. Down they go, one after the other. Bang, bang. 2 left now. They look at each other, and the closest holds out a hand to me. Listen, he says carefully as I reload. I know this seems impossible and scary. He's right. I'm fucking terrified, though I'm doing my best not to show it. These things really are getting creative. But you have to trust us on this, or at least hear us out, please. Do you have any idea how long you've been gone? The other copy shouts in anger. He's not going to listen, it's just like last time. The closest copy stares right into my eyes. I don't care what the others say, he tells me. I will never leave you behind. I swore it once, and it's a promise I intend to... Bang! I blow the impostor to kingdom come. His comrade panics and slips on the wet grass as he tries to run, and I gun him down. His lifeless body thuds to the ground, his skin twitching in various and unsettling places, as if being pressed or stretched from the inside. I put a couple of bonus bullets in him for good measure. Robbie looks over to me and studies my face. Are you good, man? He asks after a moment. Yeah, I reply, lying. Yep. I stare at the faces of my copies, corpses now. I try not to dwell on it. I glance over to Robbie. Perhaps I've let this little charade go on for too long. Robbie pales and stares right past me at the hole. I turn to follow his gaze. 3 figures clamber out, one waving a white flag. Wait! One calls above the roar of the rain. I squint through it for a better look. Don't shoot! It's me again. Another copy. Though this one is at least 2 decades older. A copy of Robbie is with him, similarly aged. A girl in her 30s walks with them, a fearful expression on her face and her hands raised. It's my daughter. A sick copy at the least, and aged up like the others. I throw my hands out, exasperated. What do you want? Listen to me, you fool, my elder copy shouts back. This is the real me, the real you, and this is the real Robbie, the real Robbie. He puts a hand on the copy of Robbie's shoulder and his other on my daughter's. She stares at me, wide-eyed. He looks so young, she says. She calls over. Dad, it's me. Do you remember? Please tell me you remember. Remember the trip we took to the beach? You took us to the coast on my 10th birthday. We saw dolphins. She reaches up to her neck and lifts a necklace with a smooth little shiny pebble attached. You let me keep this pebble. We had it turned into a necklace. Thing are about to change, my copy says to me, walking ever closer. Things beyond your understanding, and the truths of this hole barely scratch the surface. It's a passage. I think you've realized this. A passage to places beyond and between. Sometimes to other planes, yes, but the tunnels run deep. They loop back around. He slams his hands to his chest. I'm babbling. I appreciate that this might not make any sense to you. But we are from the same loop. The same path. Looped back around. I take a deep breath. I look this madman in the eyes. With the scent of the rain-washed pine and the drift of rifle smoke in my nose, I take aim and I fire. Bang! My so-called future self drops to the ground. My daughter screams and the elder copy of Robbie drops to his knees at the corpse. No! No! He cries, and I take him out as well. The copy of my daughter is the hardest. Shaking where she stands, she turns to stare at me defiant, daring me to shoot in cold silence. It doesn't have to be this way, she says, her voice wavering. I chew my tongue and then I call her bluff. Bang! Down she goes. Just another leaking corpse. Robbie stares at the ruined bodies. The trees rustle in the rain as the blasts of the rifle ring in our ears. He looks to me. How do you do it? He murmurs. How the fuck do you it? I rub a sleeve across my eyes. Do not allow anything to escape, I tell him. It's a rule for a reason. You do it so easily, he says quietly, the disgust in his voice quite clear. Is that what you think? I ask him. I turn to face him, my jaw set as the rain leaks from my chin. Tell me, Robbie. Tell me if what I'm doing is wrong. Should I be letting these things and these abominations out into the world? And where do they come from exactly? If where they're coming from is so great, then why leave it all? If there's something worse that's pushing them away, then that's all the more incentive to just keep shooting. I don't know which one of these horrors is the worst. So better safe than sorry. What if they have something important to tell us? He asks me. Important? Fuck 'em. It's all tricks and lies. The second I let my guard down, I am lost. And speaking of which, I raise the rifle and point it at his head. He backs away. Wait, hold on. He laughs anxiously, then stops when he realizes that I am not kidding around. You've gone mad, he says simply. You've lost yourself in your head. It's me, it's Robbie. If the things that come out of the ground are benevolent, then why do they all lie, Robbie? Why do they lie? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, my friend. I cock the rifle. I've enjoyed your company tonight. I really have. You were a strong imitation, I'll give you that. But you've missed a crucial piece of information. You always miss something. Robbie is dead. Long dead. Died 2 years ago. He died defending the people of this place from an abomination that rose out of that yonder hole. So I'll be seeing you now. Robbie's face contorts into shock and surprise. Please, he begins, and I put a bullet through his forehead with a loud bang. He crumples. Down he goes, just like the rest of them. That terrible black fluid pouring out and over the grass. Oversized yet still only half-formed insect legs burst from his shoulders and neck, twitching in the rain. I lift my face to the sky and take a slow, deep breath. When Robbie first appeared to me this evening from through the trees, I was too surprised to react. It was a potentially fatal mistake. But for one reason or another, the copy did not use his rifle to shoot me. If he was going to use it to kill me, he could have done so in that very first instant. He didn't. So after that, I just played along, keeping an eye on him. As I said, it gets real lonely up here, and I miss that man a great deal. The rain's letting up a little now. I watch as black sludge begins bubbling up from the hole's entrance, and I return to my hut, sitting down with a sigh in my chair as water drips from the branches and into the bucket beside me. The corpses will have melted away by morning. There won't be any more visitors tonight. The black sludge means that the tunnel needs time to recharge. I reach for my mug and take a slow sip of cold, miserable tea. 3 months down, 3 more to go. When I was a young man, I fled my home country. I will refrain from naming it here because if you knew where it was, you would be able to locate the forest, and I want it to remain as it is, obscure, mythical, and forgotten. My home country had been going through a civil war for a while, but it was not mentioned in polite society. They diminished it in their language. It was a skirmish, an upset. No one would call it a war until it ended up on our doorsteps. My father waited to flee because in his coward's heart he hoped it would be resolved before he would have to do anything. As such, when we finally picked up and left, there were precious few options open to us. The borders were tightly guarded. Air travel was all but impossible unless you had enough money to grease the palms of the military. How the forest came up, I'll never know. But soon it became clear that it would be our only hope of escaping. The forest lies close to the historic border between ours and the next country. It has never been properly mapped or charted. It remained pristine even after the industrial boom decimated every other source of tree in the country. Invading soldiers had given it a wide berth. The forest was like the war in many respects. Most just liked to pretend it didn't exist. We no longer had that luxury. My father trawled until he found a guide, a rare man who had crossed the forest not once but many times. The man eyed our family up and down, our belongings strapped to our backs, and shook his head. "You don't know the danger," he said. "The risk is too great." My father stepped forward, presenting a fan of bills. "We are desperate, please." The guide looked at the money, gripping his drink with one hand. "The forest is a dangerous place. You must obey my word, no matter what. You may lose someone. You may lose everyone. Do you still want to go?" My father pressed the money forward. The guide held up his hand. "You may pay me at the end. I don't charge for corpses." We met at the forest border at night. The guide cast a sickly eye over our bundles and moth-eaten coats, looking regretful at his decision. "I have decided this will be my last crossing," he said, shining a lantern into each of our faces. "I will not be returning after I hit the other edge of the forest. Anyone who chooses to leave may do so now with my blessing." None of us left. The guide sighed heavily. "You will all walk behind me, tread where I tread. If I say not to do something, you must obey immediately. Immediately." He paced along our group. "At all times you must look up, always. I don't care what you see, what you think is happening. Look up." We exchanged puzzled looks. "Anyone who cares to disobey me will stay." The guide trimmed the lantern wick to a mild glow. "This is my last crossing. I will not put myself in danger for anyone." We ran into problems almost immediately. Looking up made it hard to see where we were going. We bumped into each other, dropped our bundles, and made a mess of things. My little sister cried that looking up made her neck hurt. I could tell from the way the guide's brows knit together that he was not pleased. I picked my sister up and fashioned a blindfold from a kerchief. "I'll carry her. That's fair, right? I can't expect her to look up without being distracted." The guide shrugged. The forest started off as many other forests do. Smaller trees, shrubs, a patch of ferns here or there. It looked normal enough, but I kept my face up just to be safe. My neck very quickly developed an ache. After a while, the other trees dropped away and we were left with pines. Tall, straight, white pines that looked like bones. Some of them had branches broken out of the trunk, leaving a swollen dark patch like a canker. I realized that the only noise was our footsteps. No owls, no insects, no night sounds at all. My aunt was the first to tire. "Couldn't we stop? My feet are tired." She tugged at the fur stole around her neck. Their family had been slightly better off than mine. My aunt was used to people obeying her quickly. The guide said nothing but tramped on. My uncle caught up with the guide and touched his arm. "Pardon me, my wife said she's tired. Perhaps we should stop and take a rest." "No." The guide did not even hesitate. "Stop talking." My uncle looked outraged, but my father touched his arm. We trudged on. My aunt let out a mighty sigh. "How terrible to be without conversation. It's like a winter night without a fire." Without turning around, the guide spoke. "Shut up. Stop talking. This is the last time I'll tell you." My aunt reddened. Well, perhaps some people can afford to be rude, but... She trailed off and tilted her head. Is that my sister? I heard nothing. I exchanged looks with my cousin, her son. He heard nothing either. My aunt stopped. That is her. She said they were going to try the southern border. They must have gotten turned around. She turned and shouted a name. We heard no reply. Why don't we go over to their group? My uncle wheedled. Surely it must be safer to travel in a crowd. It's not really them, it's a trick, the guide said. We're not straying from this course. My uncle looked to father for comfort. My father shook his head. I'm sorry, I don't hear anything. My uncle was used to people listening when he spoke. Now he was incensed. Well, my wife and I are going to join them, he said. They seem a much more cheerful bunch. Don't go, my father said. Oh, don't go over there, the guide said not to. My uncle snorted. He put his arm around my aunt, and with a single backward glance at my cousin, they walked off into the forest. We heard their footsteps crunch along for a while, and then suddenly stop. Idiots, the guide said mournfully. The forest changed. For a time it had seemed thin enough to walk through in an hour. Now it seemed darker and deeper than should be possible. All I could hear was the breath of my little sister, steam pluming out from her mouth. My neck muscles developed a deep, burning ache. All I wanted to do was stop and roll my head a little. But I kept moving. My grandmother let out a gasp. There's something moving behind the trees. There isn't. Keep moving. The guide's voice was flat. There is. It's quite large. It's right over there. Do you see it? I looked over where she pointed. Yes, I could just barely see something dark moving beyond the ring of lantern light. It reached halfway up the trees, no mean feat, and its massive steps made no sound. At first I thought it an elk or some large deer, but what I mistook for antlers did not cluster at the head, but instead continued down the length of the thing in a tangled spine. Now that I saw it, I started picking out more and more detail. Its eyes sucked up the lantern light and threw it back at us a brilliant orange. It had been ambling along, now it appeared to be moving perpendicular to our path, seeming to cut us off. Don't look at it, came the guide's voice again, quite calm and cool. Look ahead. I obeyed. Once I turned my gaze back to the path, the thing seemed to disappear. We heard my grandmother scream, "Oh, it's got me! Help, I'm stuck in its fur! Oh, help!" The guide said quite firmly and coldly, "No." We listened to the protests as the woman who raised us after our mother died was carried off into the forest. My sister wet the shoulder of my coat with her tears. The trees were becoming strange and bent. The branches had once stuck straight away from the trunks. Now they dangled down like human limbs. I frowned. They were beginning to look like hands, my cousin gasped. He was right. It was unmistakable now. The gnarled branches terminated in hands big enough to hold a house. I kept imagining a hand spearing out and snagging us, grabbing us off the path as easy as picking up a matchstick. There were people caged in the hands. As we walked on, we could see bodies hanging from the hands in various states. Some were as skeletal as the twigs that entombed them. Some rotted and stained the white bark. Some still struggled weakly, holding hands out to us, beseeching with their eyes. One woman was not so far gone. "Help!" she called to us. "Oh, please help! I lost my husband and my guide abandoned us. You won't leave me here too, will you?" I could feel my father tense beside me. "Don't," the guide said in a warning tone. "Please." The woman was young and dressed nicely. She held out a hand heavy with rings. I would do the same if our situations were reversed. My cousin was behind me, pressing me forward. "Go on," he whispered in my ear. My father stopped in place for a moment, just looking at her. He put his hand in hers. The branch shot up to the canopy in the blink of an eye, dragging my father with it. I hissed through my teeth, gripping my sister tightly. My cousin prodded my back. "Keep going. Now we've both lost, haven't we?" His words helped bring me back into the moment. I took one step, then another. The trees were growing closer and closer together. Often I had to squeeze sideways through a passage. My neck now felt like it was on fire. My sister was growing heavy in my grip. I wanted so much to put her down and make her walk, but I couldn't risk losing her. I took a step and slipped. We had been walking on pine needles and twigs. Now the floor was made out of something larger and slipperier beneath my feet. I was only a young man, but I had lived long enough in a war-torn country to know when I was stepping on bones. My cousin squeezed my shoulder. "Keep walking. I feel it too." We awkwardly made our way through the bones, lagging behind the guide who never seemed to tire or waver. There was only the clack-clack of our steps. Light came from between the trees ahead of us. I kept looking, waiting for it to disappear. It didn't. It grew stronger. My cousin spoke. "It's nearly over. Thank God, thank—" Suddenly he wasn't there behind me. He was screaming. The guide's fingers dug into my shoulder, keeping me from turning around. "Don't be selfish. Did you put your sister through this only to kill her at the end?" His words shocked me back into sense. With my cousin still screaming, I walked after the guide. I waited for it to end, for the forest to clear, and for my cousin to stop. Half an hour. It took half an hour to reach the end of the forest. My cousin screamed the whole time. I was teary-eyed and trembling when we finally emerged from the canopy. The scenery we overlooked was farm fields and country roads. Too normal after the night I'd had. It didn't seem real. The guide looked much older than he had when we started out. I could swear I saw more streaks of white in his hair. His gaze on us was pitying. "I'll take my payment now," he said. Before I could dig out the pitiful wad of bills in my pocket, he untied the kerchief from my sister's eyes and folded it, putting it into his pocket. He turned to go. "Wait," I called to him. He stopped in his tracks. I can picture him with perfect clarity even now, his stooped back, his worn hands, the sad tilt of his head. "What happened to my cousin?" I asked. "I saw what happened to the others, but what about him?" The guide shot me a look of pity. His words haunt me to this day, clear as the moment he spoke them. He looked down. I must be going crazy. I can see a town that doesn't exist. My name is Samuel Baker. I'm a Yellowstone National Park Ranger and I need some advice. I've spent my entire career fighting wildfires for the National Park Service. And after 2 decades in the field, I thought I'd seen everything. Then about 4 hours ago, an entire town just appeared in the middle of Yellowstone National Park, and the other ranger and I are the only ones who've been in it. We're not alone, however, as you might expect from something appearing out of nowhere inside one of America's most famous parks. The town is home to many people, some of whom have been there for years. They all seem perfectly normal, but they aren't aware that they live inside a national park. My partner Thomas was the first to notice the town. He'd driven into the valley a few hours before dawn one morning and saw a brand new sign on the road. "Welcome to Hungry Horse," it read. When he drove past the next bend in the road, he saw the motel. That's when he turned around to come and get me. The two of us had driven up the valley together in our trusty old Chevy Blazer and taken the long way around because we hadn't wanted to pass through the town until we were sure what it was. We parked at the base of the mountain and hiked up. We walked across the railroad tracks and past a small gas station with a lone oil drum full of diesel fuel and another filled with water. The street was lined with old cars, some of which looked like they'd been there for a while, others which had probably just arrived that morning. Hungry Horse wasn't a ghost town, or even abandoned. It was thriving. Thomas and I entered the town cautiously, because despite appearances, this place could be dangerous. While we didn't run into any trouble, we did notice that everyone seemed indifferent to the fact they just appeared out of nowhere. Most of them ignored us completely, although a few gave us strange looks. "Some of these people look familiar," I said, looking over at Thomas. He nodded. "I know what you mean, Sam. I recognized a couple people in the diner too. It's weird. It's weird." Those words echoed in my head as I watched a man carrying a bucket walk down the sidewalk. It's weird, I repeated silently to myself. My eyes followed his movements. The man carried himself with confidence and purpose, but he never looked up at where he was walking. Instead, he stared straight ahead and continued forward without looking back once. He disappeared around the corner of a building and I noticed another person staring directly at me. He was tall and thin, wearing a black hiking jacket. His face was pale and he was bald. He was standing in the doorway of a small coffee shop. He reminded me of the missing hiker we had searched for last week. That's when I realized why I recognized some of the people here. They are all people who have vanished from national parks. That's how we found out that almost every single person in Hungry Horse had been reported missing from national parks. We spoke to everyone we could find. Some refused to talk, others were friendly enough, but none of them knew anything about why they were there. As far as they were concerned, they lived in Hungry Horse, Montana. They weren't sure exactly when they arrived there. A lot of them couldn't remember much before arriving in Hungry Horse. They also told us they'd been here for years. Many of them had been born and raised in the town and believed it was the real deal. They all knew the townsfolk by name and went to school with them. One woman, an older lady named Irene, told us that she had no idea that she'd been reported missing. She worked at the local hardware store and had been living in Hungry Horse for more than 45 years. "What about your husband?" I asked. "Do you have children? Grandchildren?" She shook her head. "No, I've never married." "How do you feel about being here? Do you miss anywhere else? Your family, maybe?" Again, she shook her head. "Not really. This is my home." As far as she knew, this was the only home she'd ever known. I tried to ask if she missed her family, but she just smiled and told me that her family was right here in Hungry Horse, Montana. We thanked her and left the hardware store. Hopping back into our park ranger truck, we drove deeper into the town. "I really don't like this, Sammy," Thomas said. "I've had a feeling of being watched ever since we entered town." I looked over at him. He was staring at a man standing by a large semi-trailer outside the diner. The man was holding a jug of milk. I couldn't help but think of the hiker we'd found dead last week. "Sam, are you listening to me?" I snapped back to reality and looked at my partner. Thomas had started quivering in fear. "Sorry, what did you say?" "I said I think we should leave. I don't want to be here anymore." I looked around the town. There were so many people here. So many people who shouldn't be here. All of them were perfectly normal. Some of them even knew each other. How could there be so many people in a town that didn't exist? "I agree. Let's go," I said. We drove away from the town and back to the ranger cabin. Thomas was still shaking. "I'm going to call this in," he said. "This whole thing is bullshit, but we'd better document it anyway. I mean, how could an entire town full of missing people just appear in the middle of Yellowstone?" I nodded. "Okay, I'll be in the cabin. I think I need some time to process all this shit." I sat down on the couch and closed my eyes. It all felt unreal. I kept thinking about the hiker we'd found out in the woods last week. He'd died while out on a hike in the wilderness. He'd been alone and confused, but I just saw him alive and well, in a town that doesn't exist. I opened my eyes and looked around. I took in a deep breath and let it out. It smelled like wood smoke and pine. I stood up and started pacing the room. What am I supposed to make of all this? I asked myself. Is this some kind of sick joke? Did the government put a town in Yellowstone for some reason? What if it's not a town? Maybe it's a cover-up for something worse. I thought before zoning out. There was a knock on the door. It startled me out of my daydream. "Come in," I yelled. Two men came inside, both dressed in black suits. "Are you the one in charge here?" one of them asked. I looked at him and nodded. The guy was wearing a badge on his chest and a gun on his hip. He looked like an FBI agent. I'm about to go and talk to them, and I don't know if they'll believe me. What the fuck do I do? First off, let me clarify some things from my first post. I was a wildland firefighter up until a year ago when I decided I needed a change of pace. They weren't FBI agents. They said they were from a private company that deals with the otherworldly. I sat in front of the two men, waiting for them to start asking questions. "So, do you know why I've been assigned to this case?" the taller of the two said. "You're the only one in the park who knows anything about this." I nodded. "Thomas also knows, but I think you guys already know that. It's pretty weird. The town you described doesn't exist, not according to the GPS and satellite data." "Yes, it does," I answered, surprised. "It's a lie," the second man said. He had short blonde hair and wore glasses. "We checked every single point on the map, every house, every business. There is nothing there." "Bullshit! You can't tell me you've been everywhere in the park and haven't noticed it," I said angrily. "When I first came to the park, I saw the sign for Hungry Horse. I thought it was a joke at first, but then I saw the motel, the gas station, the diner, the hardware store, and I saw the people inside them." The man with the glasses nodded slowly. "But we've checked every inch of the surrounding area. We've looked at aerial photos, satellite images. We've even flown over the valley with a helicopter." "Well, maybe you should have a look again. Maybe you missed something," I said defiantly. "We did. There's nothing there. It's not possible." "Do I have to fucking show you where it is myself?" I asked. Both men exchanged glances. Then the shorter one nodded. "Very well. If you're so sure you've seen something unusual, we'll take you there." "Thank you," I said. I got out of my chair and followed the two men out of the cabin. They were in their early 50s, both with short hair and blue eyes. They were talking quietly to each other as I followed them out of the cabin to their unmarked car. "Now," the man with the glasses said, "if you could just lead us to your town." "Sure," I replied. We drove deeper into the park. Our vehicle was equipped with a topographical GPS system, which made it easy to navigate through the rugged terrain. After an hour of driving, we came to a hill overlooking a wide valley. We passed the sign for Hungry Horse. "Did you see the sign?" I yelled. The men just looked at each other. "I'm sorry, what?" the shorter one asked. "There's a sign here. It says Hungry Horse, right?" The man shook his head. "I don't see anything." He pulled off the road and stopped right before the sign. He turned off the engine and looked at me. "Maybe we should get out and look again," he suggested. I agreed. I got out of the car and ran over to the sign. "It's right here," I shouted. He walked up behind me and looked over my shoulder. "What the hell is this?" "It's a sign. It says Hungry Horse," I yelled. He looked at me and glared. I grabbed his arm and pulled him over to where I could see the sign. "Can't you read?" He pulled away and rolled his eyes. "Read what?" "It says Hungry Horse," I yelled. "What the hell are you talking about?" he yelled back. I pointed at the sign. "Look, the name of the town." The man sighed. "There's no sign there." I got angry and was about to yell at the agent when out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walking towards us from the out of the woods in the direction of the town. It was Irene, the older woman from the hardware store. My eyes lit up and I pointed at her. "Irene!" I yelled excitedly. The agent turned to face the old woman. His eyes widened in surprise and he opened his mouth to say something. But before he could, Irene hit him and sent him flying into a tree. "You shouldn't have come back, Ranger," she hissed. With lightning speed, she charged the agent with the glasses. "Run!" I yelled and jumped into the car. It was too late for the agent. Irene had already snapped his neck. I frantically ran back to the unmarked car and tried to start it. The engine sputtered and failed to turn over. Irene stood directly in front of me, blocking my path back to the cabin. "What the fuck are you?" I yelled. "You should have never come here," she said. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "What the hell is going on?" I yelled. She snarled and lunged forward. Her teeth had grown sharp and she snapped at me, but I evaded her bite and rammed my fist into her stomach. "God damn it!" I yelled. I grabbed her shoulders and threw her into the side of the car. She slid across the hood and fell to the ground. I jumped around the car and kicked her once in the ribs. "I'm going to kill you," I said. She smiled. I've been dead for years, honey. I was about to punch her again when a hand grabbed my arm and yanked me backwards. I spun around and stared at the person who grabbed my arm. It was Thomas, my partner. He had followed the agents and I. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. "Don't be stupid. We have to get back to the cabin." I looked at him and shook my head. "No, we can't run from these things," I said, flabbergasted. "What the hell is wrong with you?" He slapped me hard across the face. "Shut up! Shut the fuck up! Just shut up!" I rubbed my cheek and looked at Thomas in disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" His eyes were wide open with panic. I heard Irene starting to get up. "You have to leave now, right fucking now." He grabbed me by the collar and pushed me into the driver's seat of the dead agent's car. "Get in," he yelled, "and drive." "What about you?" I asked. "I can't fight them anymore. You know how many rangers they've taken?" He said, "Just get out of here." "We just found out about the town yesterday. How do you know this shit?" I yelled. "You just found out about the town," he replied. "The fuck does that mean?" "Just go. I'll keep Irene occupied. Get back to the cabin and read my journal." "I don't believe this shit," he nodded. "I know." I pulled a 180 and sped back down the road towards the cabin. I saw Thomas jump on Irene in the rearview mirror. He looked bigger than he usually does. He was standing on top of her, pinning her arms to the ground. "Fuck you," Irene yelled. Thomas punched her in the face and she went limp. "Stay down, bitch." The last thing I saw was Thomas running towards the town. I'm back at the cabin and reading through his journal. There's so much I never knew about him. Hey guys, it's Sam again. I finished reading Thomas's journal. I can't believe I trusted him. Thomas knew everything. He knew what the town was all along. He knew Irene would come after me. And he didn't tell me anything. I feel like such an idiot. Every single national park has one of these towns. He had been the head of a team of people called the Watchers, a branch of a company called ARC, Anomaly Research Corporation, assigned to monitor Hungry Horse, to make sure that the people who go missing in national parks are found before the town can get them. Jesus Christ, why didn't I figure this out sooner? Why did I trust him? Stupid, stupid Sam. I read some more of his journal. It explains that the towns might be sentient and can choose who can see and interact with them, and how national parks are only founded when one of these towns blink into existence. Yellowstone is the first and has the largest town, but the towns aren't the main threat. It's what the people who get taken turn into. When they get taken, their minds are changed and become something else, something sinister. I flip to another page, and it explains that the town doesn't take everyone. Some people are harder for the town to influence, and they can resist its power. These people are called Watchers. Watchers can still be taken, but it's rare. I think Hungry Horse just took the last Watcher in Yellowstone. There's a phone number and a note written inside the front cover of the journal. It says to call the number if Thomas is missing, or if he seems off, and to tell the person who picks up on the other end that Thomas has been compromised. This is fucking insane, I thought to myself. I set the journal aside and looked out the window. The sun was setting and it cast a beautiful orange glow over the mountains. I could hear the river flowing nearby. I heard a noise outside and turned around. A large shadow moved quickly across the trees near the cabin. I watched as it approached the edge of the woods. It was Thomas. He didn't look injured at all despite the fight with Irene. I ran to the door and locked it as he stepped onto the porch. I looked out the window at Thomas. "Why aren't you injured?" I asked through the window. "They can't hurt me anymore," he answered. "Who are they?" I asked. "The town," he whispered. "The town?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "What happened to your team?" I asked. "He's dead," he said. "He's gone." "Is that why you never told me about the town?" I asked. "I didn't want to scare you," he admitted. "How'd you know Irene would come after me?" I asked. "The town let me know," he said. "The town?" I asked. What? You know what I mean, he said. The town tells you stuff because you're a watcher? I asked. Yes, he whispered. What the fuck? I asked. It's not important, he said. Your journal didn't say the town was intelligent. I said, it's alive. He responded, it thinks and it feels. It's a living entity. Its mind is vast and powerful. It talks to you? I asked. Sometimes, he said. What does it say? I asked. Everything. Everything. He replied. I was dumbstruck. That's impossible. It's true. Now please let me inside, he loudly begged. I noticed something was off with his voice. Why do you sound different? I asked. Because you're making me nervous, he answered. You're freaking me out, I yelled. Please let me in, he repeated. I looked up at him for a few minutes without saying anything. There was something about his face that made me curious, something that seemed odd. Finally, I shook my head. I'm sorry, Thomas, I said. He threw his body at the door. Let me in, he shouted. I can't do that, Thomas, I said calmly. I unlocked the gun locker and grabbed the only shotgun we had. I pointed it at him and waited. Thomas stopped moving and leaned against the door. His breathing became shallow and quick. Sammy, you're my best friend, he started to say. I'm sorry, Thomas, but I can't open the door, I snarled. Stop lying, he yelled. Open the fucking door! He started throwing himself against it again. Panicking, I pushed the table and couch in front of it. Samuel, he screamed, open this door. I just ignored him and went upstairs and laid on the bed. He kept banging on the door for an hour. Eventually, he stopped banging on the door, but I could still hear him yelling. I think I might just call that number he wrote down in his journal. Maybe ARC will send someone to deal with Thomas. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a man picked up and said, Hello, Thomas? I sat there silently. Hello? He asked again. It got Thomas, I yelled. Are you safe? The man asked. No, I'm not fucking safe, I screamed. Thomas has become one of the things from Hungry Horse, and now he's here, and he's trying to break into the cabin. Hold on, he said. We'll send someone right away. Is anyone else with you? Just me, I answered. Okay, stay put, and don't let him get inside the cabin, he said. Then he hung up. I laid back down on the bed and tried to ignore the sounds coming from downstairs. I could hear Thomas pounding against the door again. I was terrified that ARC wouldn't show up soon enough. Then suddenly I heard a car pull up outside. I jumped off the bed and rushed downstairs and looked out of the window. There were men with rifles standing outside. I saw one of them run to the cabin. The banging at the door stopped. Thomas had noticed them. I heard Thomas roar and the sound of gunshots. I watched as the men loaded Thomas, who was still alive somehow, into the back of a van. The 2 men got into the van and drove off as another car pulled up to the cabin. A man in a white lab coat stepped out and walked up to the door, knocking on it. Open the door, Sam. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Who the fuck are you? My name is Dr. Jade Knoxblood, he said. Well, what the hell do you want? I demanded. I need to talk to you about Thomas, he said. I don't have time for your bullshit. Just leave me alone, I yelled at him. I heard him sigh, and that's when I felt an arm grab my shoulder and something prick my neck. I started to curse and the world faded to black. I woke up on the couch about 30 minutes later. Looking around, I saw that Dr. Oxblood was sitting in a chair across from me. Now that everything has calmed down, you're going to tell me everything you know, he said. I guess I don't have a choice, guys. I'll update you all after I talk with Dr. Oxblood. Oxblood drove me to the headquarters of ARC. Once there, Dr. Oxblood led me into his office and told me to sit down. He locked the door and sat across from me. The room was filled with bookshelves and pictures of presidents and generals from many wars. On the walls were weapons that I didn't recognize. So tell me about the town, he said. What makes you think I know anything about the town? I asked. I have reason to believe you are aware of its existence, he said. Fine. "What do you want to know?" I asked. "Tell me everything you know about the town," he said. "Everything?" I asked. "All of it," he answered. I told him about the day Thomas told me about the town, our trip to Hungry Horse, and how Thomas had stayed behind to fight Irene. He listened intently as I spoke. He was taking notes while I talked, and occasionally asked me a question. When I finished telling him everything he wanted to know, he stood up and walked over to a cabinet and opened it. He reached inside and pulled out a small silver box and placed it on his desk. "What's that?" I asked. "It's a key," he answered. "One day you'll need it." "Why would I ever need a key?" I asked. "You'll find out," he said. "If you really want to find out what happened to your friend and figure out what the town is, you'll use the key to unlock the secrets of the town." "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "I can't tell you that," he said. "You'll have to learn to trust me in time." He handed me the key. It was heavier than I expected it to be. I looked at it for a long moment before putting it in my pocket. "What do you plan on doing with me?" I asked. "You are a very valuable asset to us," he said. "We want you to become the newest watcher of Yellowstone." I stared at him for a second, remembering what I read in Thomas's journal. What the hell is a watcher exactly? "It's a title given to humans who have been chosen by ARC to help protect the world from the supernatural," he said. "Doesn't ARC already have watchers?" I asked. "Yes, they have many watchers, but none of them have ever entered one of the towns without changing like you. You are the first human to enter one of the towns and return without becoming a monster," he answered. I sat there and thought about it. "So if I agree to become a watcher, what are the risks?" I asked. "There are no guarantees," he said. "The risk of your life, your sanity, and possibly losing your humanity are all high." "So what happens if I decline?" I asked. "We will kill you," he answered. I laughed. "Why do you think I'll accept?" I asked. He smiled. "Because you want to save your best friend Thomas and you want answers." "Are you saying you can give me those answers?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "But once you become a watcher, I will be able to teach you everything you need to know." "How long until I can become a watcher?" I asked. He smiled. "You've been a watcher ever since you read the journal." I stared at him for a minute before shaking my head. "You can't be serious," I exclaimed. "I am completely serious," he said. I sighed. "All right, so what exactly do you expect me to do? I don't know any more about the towns than you do." "I know that much," he replied. "So why did you ask me here then?" I asked. "To offer you a job," he said. "A job?" I asked. "Yes, a job as a watcher. I want you to become one of us," he answered. "What kind of job?" I asked. "In order to become an official watcher, you must become a member of ARC," he answered. "What does that entail?" I asked. "You will have to sign an agreement stating that you will work for us. You will also be required to undergo training and take a test to prove yourself," he explained. "And what do I get in return for signing this agreement?" I asked. "A bigger paycheck than you've ever seen," he answered. I laughed. "Seriously?" "The pay is good," he said. "But the real benefit is the knowledge that you're helping to keep the world safe from monsters, demons, and other threats to humanity. Not everyone gets that chance." "Sounds good to me," I said. "Good," he said. "Congratulations." He unlocked the door with the key and we left the room together. On the way out, a man dressed in a park ranger uniform approached me. "This is your new partner," Dr. Oxblood said. "Welcome to ARC," he said. "Do you mind if I ask your name?" I asked. "My name is John," he answered. I shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, John." "Likewise," he said. "All right, well, I guess this is goodbye for now, Oxblood. I'm sure I'll see you soon," I said. "You better hope you do," he joked. After leaving the building, John and I got in his car and drove off. "So where are we going?" I asked. "Back to your cabin," he answered. We arrived at my cabin. The sun was setting and the sky was getting dark. We got out of the car and headed towards the cabin. Once inside, I sat on the couch and looked at John. So what's going to happen now? I asked. That depends on you, he answered. What do you mean? I asked. John took out a bottle of whiskey and poured himself a drink. I watched as he drank most of it before answering. I intend to train you to become a watcher. Until then, you'll be living with me, he said. Living with you? I asked. For the next couple of months, he answered. I'll help you get used to being a watcher, so that when it comes time to choose your own partner, you'll be able to keep them safe. You'll also start to learn things about ARC that even some of our agents don't know. What kind of things? I asked. I can't really explain it to you, he answered. It will only make sense once you're trained. I nodded. Fine. Drink up, he said. We need to get you settled in. I laughed and poured myself some whiskey. John says training begins in an hour. I'm going to take a nap before he trains me. I was woken up from my nap by the sound of shattering glass and John yelling for me to get my ass downstairs. I ran down the stairs and into the kitchen. What happened? I asked. It wasn't John who answered my question. Hello, Samuel. It seems I've got the upper hand this time, Irene said, holding John by the shoulders. She looked much younger than when I last saw her. She was wearing a black dress, white gloves, and her hair was done up. She was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. What did you do to Thomas? I asked. Thomas was a fool, Samuel. He chose to stay behind to protect you. He made his choice and my town changed him, she said. I would have killed you both if you hadn't escaped. But now you're mine again, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. What are you talking about? What do you mean your town? I asked. Irene smirked, her eyes sparkling with hatred. My town is a demon. The town is a creature created by the demon king Azazel. He built our town to serve as his prison. He put all the monsters in it so they could one day be released upon your world. I was speechless. My mind was reeling from the news of the town. Who are you? I finally managed to say. I'm the gatekeeper of the demon kingdom. I'm here to destroy the world and end life as we know it, she said. Let me go, John shouted. She slammed him against the wall and held him there with ease. You're not going anywhere until I decide otherwise, she said, smiling. Release him, I yelled. She looked at me and laughed. You don't seem to understand, Samuel. I control this place. Nobody is going to help you. She let go of John and walked towards me. You don't scare me, and I know you can't hurt me, she said. That's when I remembered the silver key Dr. Oxblood had given me. Where did you get that? She snarled. Wouldn't you like to know? I quipped back at her. I suddenly felt something strange. It was like my body was being pulled away from my soul. I struggled to hold on to it. What are you doing? She screeched. I tried to resist, but it was too late. My soul was gone. Give me the key! Irene screamed, running towards me. Suddenly, I was back in my body again. I was kneeling on the floor in front of Irene, holding onto my head with one hand and clutching my chest with the other. I could see everything in slow motion. I watched as Irene charged towards me, her face twisted with rage. I stood up and grabbed her by the neck, squeezing tightly. Let go of me, she screeched. I squeezed harder. I felt her throat bulge and blood begin to leak out of her mouth. I threw her through the window she had broken in through. I watched as she got up and glared at me before turning around and heading back towards Hungry Horse. I turned around, looking over to John, who was standing in the doorway, a deep gash running down the left side of his face. He smiled at me. You might not need as much training as I thought you would, he said. That was pretty impressive. I felt a surge of pride. I'll be right back, I said. Be careful, Samuel, he said. Don't get yourself killed. I smiled. I wouldn't dream of it. What's happening to me, you guys? I followed Irene back to her house in Hungry Horse. I was hoping to kill her, but right as I was about to enter through a window in the basement, I heard her say, You dumbasses ready yet? We just need 5 more humans and I'll be powerful enough to open another Hellgate. I want to open the next one in Canada. I backed away, looking in through a window on the bottom floor, and I saw about 20 of the townspeople gathered inside. That's when I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, dialing John's number as I crossed Hungry Horse's border back into Yellowstone. John answered his phone almost immediately. "Where are you?" he asked. I ignored his question and asked one of my own instead. "Are there any people camping in Yellowstone tonight?" I asked. "I'm not sure. Why?" he asked. "Irene only needs to take 5 more people before she can create another town. And she's got a group together to go out and find some," I said. He swore under his breath. "How big is the group?" I asked. "About 20, he said. "All right, listen. I have a plan. We need to stop her before she can take more people. Are there any people camping close to Hungry Horse?" I questioned him. "There's a bunch camping around Old Faithful," he said. "How far away are we from them?" I asked. "I don't know exactly. It's hard to tell how far away anything is in Montana at night, but they should be within half an hour or less," he answered. "All right. Listen, I have a plan. Can you get to the campground before midnight?" I asked. "Yeah, I can be there in 30 minutes, he answered. "Good. Get your gear together and meet me at Glacier. Don't forget to bring your guns," I ordered. "Roger that, see you at Glacier," he said. I hung up the phone and stared at it for several seconds before dialing Oxblood's number. "Samu," I cut him off. "No time. I need you to send a team out to the campground at Glacier," I told him. "All right, I'll have a team heading out as soon as possible," he answered. I hung up the phone as I began to run faster than any human has ever run before. I thought about Irene and how close she was to opening another hellgate. I was filled with rage knowing that I might die trying to stop her, but I couldn't think about that now. I needed to focus on what I was doing. If Irene opened another gate, who knows what will happen. The moon was slowly rising into the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The air was cold, the temperature dropping as I ran. I could hear the sounds of the wolves chasing their prey somewhere nearby. As I ran towards the campground near Glacier, I could smell smoke emanating from the campground. I shivered at the familiar scent and continued to run. As I got closer to Glacier, I noticed the campground was packed full of tents and RVs. I started hearing gunshots and screams. I looked around frantically for ARC operatives, but it didn't appear that they were here yet. There was a large fire burning in the middle of the campground. It looked like someone had set it. I kept running, weaving between the tents, until I found a tent that was completely shredded on one side and engulfed in flames. There was a body inside. It was completely mangled. I could barely make out any details of the person's face. There was no way of telling what race or sex the corpse was, but whoever this person was, they definitely weren't a friend of Irene's. I looked around the campground again and saw nothing but chaos. People were screaming, crying, and running away from Irene's monsters as John fought them off. Suddenly I heard the sound of a helicopter. I looked up at the night sky and saw an ARC helicopter swooping in. It hovered over the middle of the campground, their lights shining brightly. "Ark! Come on, hurry!" I yelled. I was still a few hundred feet away from the fight when I saw one of those things jump onto the roof of an RV and launch itself at the helicopter. It smashed through the cockpit window and tore the pilot out of her seat. I watched helplessly as the helicopter careened out of control, crashing into the last section of the campground that wasn't blocked by Irene's people. The helicopter exploded, sending debris everywhere and causing panic amongst the remaining campers. I took off running, making my way towards the center of the campground where John and his men were fighting the creatures. He kept them at bay, but they were slowly overwhelming him. That's when Irene grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground, her face inches from his, her long red nails glistening in the moonlight. "What do you think you're doing?" she growled. John struggled to speak. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" He wheezed. She leaned in closer and brought her lips to John's ear. "What do I want?" she whispered, then pushed him back, sending him flying into the dirt. "I want your world," she yelled. She pointed at John and the campers. "And nothing you can do will stop me." She roared with laughter. She stepped forward and placed her foot on John's neck. Now you're going to watch as my people slaughter every single person you were trying to protect." My vision went red, and I let out the loudest, most visceral roar I've ever heard. The fighting instantly stopped as everyone winced and covered their ears. Everyone but Irene, that is. Irene turned and snarled at me. "Hey, assbutt," I sneered at her. Well, looks like I'm fighting Irene, I thought to myself. If I don't update you guys within 48 hours, I've probably lost the fight. Wish me luck, I really could use it. I stood in front of her, my hands balled into fists at my sides. I looked into Irene's eyes as she glared back at me with pure hatred in her own. "Do you really think you stand a chance against me? I am the strongest being you will ever have to face. You are nothing compared to what I can do," she yelled, her voice filled with venom. "Watch me," I responded. I took several steps back and leaned forwards, letting the muscles in my legs tense up. My shoulders tightened, and I could feel my back arch. I let out another primal roar as I prepared to pounce. Irene smirked, her eyes sparkling in the light of the burning fires. "Go ahead, you'll never touch me, Watcher," she taunted. "You're far too—" I didn't give her the time to finish. I sprang forward, slamming into Irene and knocking us both to the ground. I felt her claws rip through my jacket as we fell, but I didn't care. I wanted to tear her apart. We rolled over and over, punching and clawing at each other. I tried to use my enhanced strength to pin her down, but she was too quick and dexterous. I managed to hit her in the stomach, but she simply grabbed my arm and threw me across the campground. I slammed into the side of an RV, which sent it rolling. The impact knocked all the wind out of me and left me stunned for a moment. I lay there in pain, unable to move while Irene walked over to me. "You should have stayed in your cabin, you pathetic little Watcher," she screamed. I rolled onto my back and wiped the blood from my mouth as I watched her approach. "I'm going to enjoy ripping you apart," she said. "Not if I can help it," I growled. I rose to my knees and let out a defiant roar. "I'm going to end you, Irene," I said. She laughed. "Do you know how many Watchers before you thought that?" she taunted. "Maybe I'll be the first to actually do it," I said. "Won't be the last. I've been killing Watchers since before you were born. And I'll continue to kill them until my power is absolute," she said. "Not today," I promised. I didn't have to wait very long to test my words. Irene charged at me, and with one fluid motion I grabbed her by the neck and flung her to my right. She smashed into a picnic table. The force of the impact knocked the entire thing over, spilling food and drinks everywhere. Irene let out a scream of anger and frustration as she scrambled to her feet. She picked up the picnic table and threw it at me. I used my enhanced strength to leap out of the way, but the table splintered and cracked against the side of an RV. I turned to see Irene charging at me again. I sidestepped her attack and punched her in the stomach. She grunted and doubled over, falling to her knees. I kicked her in the face, sending her crashing backward. Irene got to her feet and charged at me once more, swinging the broken remains of the picnic table around like a weapon. I ducked under it and kicked her in the chest, slamming her back into a tree. She fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Irene struggled to get to her feet. "You won't kill me. You'll never be able to kill me," she said. I could tell she really was starting to doubt that. "You're wrong, we both know I can," I said. Irene finally was able to stand up. She brought the broken remains of the picnic table around like a shield. "Come on then, Watcher, let's finish this." I lunged forward, my hands outstretched. I slammed them into the wooden railing of the picnic table, shattering it and knocking Irene to the ground. I grabbed her by the throat and lifted her up off the ground. "You will pay for everything you've done, every life you took," I growled. "You'll never kill us all," she spat in my face. "More of you humans join us every day." She began laughing. I gripped her head and twisted hard. Her neck snapped like a twig and the red light faded from her eyes. I turned to look at the chaos that was taking place in the campground behind me. I let out a primal, earth-shaking roar and tore into the last of Irene's group. My rage was so powerful that the ground shook and trees toppled. The sound of metal screaming in protest echoed throughout the night as I fought. It was beautiful. I lost track of time as I killed each and every one of them, leaving no survivors. They had made their choice, and now they would suffer the consequences. The carnage was horrible, and I hadn't even reached Hungry Horse yet. I tore the last of the group apart as I reached the town, and as I did, the sun finally started to rise, and the residents of Irene's town were already up and about. They were in for a surprise. I started at the diner, tearing the door off the hinges and slaughtering every last resident inside. I stormed through town, destroying anything that got in my way. I moved quickly and efficiently, tearing through a row of houses, smashing through walls and breaking furniture. The citizens were panicked. They were running everywhere trying to escape, only to find themselves trapped in the middle of my rampage. I heard the screams and cries of terror as I destroyed the town, and soon it was done. I had slaughtered everyone who lived there, and I was left standing in the center of a pile of dead bodies. It was over. Irene had failed. The people of her town were gone. I grinned and called Dr. Oxblood. He would definitely enjoy hearing about this. Good job, Samuel. I heard it was quite the show. I wish I'd been there to witness it, Oxblood said. It was incredible. I don't think I'll ever forget it, I replied. Excellent work, Samuel. Your work here is done. Go home and take some time to rest. There will be more blood to spill soon enough. These towns aren't the only weird thing about national parks, Oxblood said. Understood, I said. I'll contact you when I need you again, Oxblood added. I hung up the phone and closed my eyes. What was next? I couldn't wait to find out.